Okay, hello everyone. I'm Andrew Devine, Director for Agricultural Affairs at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, or USTR, in DC. We are the lead trade negotiator for the U.S. government, so we go around yelling at people when we think they've violated their trade obligations. But here today, I'm going to talk about sort of how the technologies and the regulatory frameworks designed to regulate these technologies have an impact on trade and have an impact on production and innovation in third countries. So I think there's a temptation to think about these technologies purely in the domestic context, to think about them in the domestic context. And we're hearing about these technologies and thinking, well, which one of these can we take back to our countries and use successfully there? Which one of the regulatory approaches that we've covered can we use in our countries? But there's a capacity to have an enormous impact on third countries, what we do in our own countries. So, for example, in the United States, there was a lawsuit a few years ago where a shipment of US corn, biotech corn, that was unapproved in China, arrived in China and was rejected. And there were huge costs associated with it, a long lawsuit. And at the end of all this, the developers in the United States were found to be in some part liable for the situation and for the costs associated with it. So now we're in this situation where developers in the US won't commercialize a new biotech product in the US until it's approved in major export markets. So that's just an example of how it can have real on the ground effects. But in particular, there's one example where there's a product that's been awaiting approval for over 10 years and now is almost going to run out of its patent protection. So you can imagine, what's the point in innovating? What's the point in developing these products if you don't have patent protection at the end of it to make any money off of it? And the academics may be laughing at that. But so that impacts the scientists and impacts the developers and the innovators. But these things also impact all of us. We've heard about these technologies over the last couple of days that have broad impacts regardless of where they're used. So if a product is more climate resilient and can produce in bad conditions, that helps global food security. If there's a product that requires less water or less energy or produces fewer emissions, that's good for the entire world environment, regardless of where it's produced. If you care about animal welfare, then a genetic modification that increases animal welfare should be important to you, regardless of where those animals are. So that's why we need to consider some of these trade impacts in any regulatory framework we develop for these technologies. And with that in mind, I'd like to review some of the international obligations we have that we've all signed up for. The World Trade Organization Agreement on Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures, or the SPS agreement, outlines some of these obligations. And while the technologies may not be new, or while the technologies are new and the regulatory frameworks are new, these obligations still apply, just like any other sanitary or phytosanitary measure. So we're going to look at some of the key provisions, but first I want to start with just an example to help us walk through these things. So let's say Canada and Mexico, in a joint project with the University of Toronto and the University of Mexico City, have developed a new genetically engineered pig. And let me tell you, this pig is amazing. It's going to change the world. It can grow a full head of human hair. And we can transplant these hairs into humans, and suddenly we all have full heads of hair. It's amazing. We all want access to this product. Mexico and Canada both want to export these pigs to the United States. The problem is, here I am, I'm the regulator in the US. I hate Justin Trudeau. He's so handsome. He's so young and accomplished. It makes me feel like I haven't done anything with my life when I see how far he is in his life. So my first instinct is I'm going to allow the pig to come in from Mexico, but definitely not from Canada, because I got to stick it to Justin Trudeau somehow. Okay, unfortunately for me, but fortunately for Justin Trudeau, let's look at Article 2.3 of the SPS agreement, which is members shall ensure that their sanitary and phytosanitary measures do not arbitrarily or unjustifiably discriminate between members where identical or similar conditions prevail. So unfortunately, I can't just ban this coming from Canada and allow it from Mexico. It's a bummer. I'm gonna have to allow it from both. Or, you know what, I hate Justin Trudeau so much that I'm gonna ban it from both of them. So Mexico and Canada, neither of them can export this pig to the United States. Bummer again. Sanitary and phytosanitary measures shall not be applied in a manner which would constitute a disguised restriction on international trade. This is pretty clearly a disguised restriction on international trade. I'm trying to punish Justin Trudeau, and this has nothing to do with protecting any legitimate objective. So I can't do that. But it's okay because I've had some time to think about it, and I've gotten over my issues. I talked to a therapist, but in the process of reflecting on all of this, I realized, wait a minute, we have a native pig in the United States. You've heard of the bald eagle. We have a bald pig too, and it's got a whole white head and a black body. You know, most people probably haven't heard of this pig, but I'm telling you about it today. And now I'm worried. This pig with a full head of hair is going to come into the United States. And what's going to happen to our bald pigs? Are we going to lose these bald pigs forever because they will be, you know, they'll be crossbreeding, or who knows what'll happen? So I'm going to keep that ban in place, even though I've gotten over my issues with Justin Trudeau. Unfortunately, for me, but fortunately for innovation, the Article 5.1 says members shall ensure that their sanitary or phytosanitary measures are based on an assessment as appropriate to the circumstances of the risks, etc. Okay, so you got to do a risk assessment. So I can't just, you know about this pig population in the United States and create a ban as a result. We've covered a lot of the considerations you need to think about with a risk assessment. You can ask the other Andrew about that. I'm sure he would be happy to answer your questions. But so let's say I've conducted a risk assessment. I've discovered there really is a risk that these pigs could escape captivity in the United States and breed with our bald pigs. And that's legitimate and a real concern. But Article 5.6 says, when establishing or maintaining sanitary or phytosanitary measures to achieve the appropriate level of sanitary or phytosanitary protection, members shall ensure that such measures are not more trade restrictive than required to achieve their appropriate level of sanitary or phytosanitary protection. So I have to really be a little more targeted in this process. I can't just, or before I create this complete ban on these pigs coming in from Canada and Mexico, I have to consider some less trade restrictive alternatives. So let's say we realize, oh, it's only the male pigs, it's only the boars that are capable of actually recreating this this full head of hair in a population outside of the genetically modified pig. So there's no reason to ban the import of sows. So my ban has now become overly restrictive. I could find less burdensome alternatives that would achieve the same objective. At the same time, what if my ban is on all the pigs and the pork products, everything associated with these pigs? Well, if the concern is that there's going to be crossbreeding between these pigs and the domestic population, my bald pigs, what's the basis of excluding bacon made from these pigs? There's no risk that the bacon is going to mate with the bald pig and create a full-haired pig, however you say it with pigs. So it's totally overly burdensome to ban the meat as well. And we could go even more specific, more targeted. I think we need to consider other possible alternatives before we just come up with these strict bans. For example, what if there's just a certain age of the boars where they escape captivity? Can we import the boars that are older than that? What if there's only certain regions of the U.S. where my bald pigs live? They only live in Hawaii. Is there a reason we can't import these genetically engineered pigs to more remote areas of the country? So all these things we should just be considering as part of our process. Really, this should be included in the risk assessment. So I've come up with a lot of things that I can't do, but there's actually a good guide just to help us find out what we can do. And that's Article 3.2 says, sanitary or phytosanitary measures which conform to international standards, guidelines, or recommendations shall be deemed to be necessary to protect human, animal, or plant health and presumed to be consistent with the relevant provisions of this agreement. So we can always be looking to international standards as a guide to what we do in our own countries. That's obviously tough when it comes to these new technologies because there may not be international standards yet. That's part of the work of this workshop, right? To understand these new technologies and get to a place where we can be establishing international standards. But generally speaking, this is a good guide. If we can follow international standards, we're generally going to be more likely to be compliant with our international obligations. So those aren't all the obligations we have under international trade laws or even under the SPS agreement, but just a few principles. So I'll summarize them again. Our measures should be non-discriminatory and not disguised as a barrier to trade. They should be based on risk assessments and international standards. They should not be more restrictive than necessary to achieve an objective. And again, we can look to international standards as our guide. So I hope that's been useful to all of you as a trade lesson. Thank you.